I have to start by apologizing because you all came to a conference called JSConf. Oh, it's not plugged in yet. Will it come in there? Let's see. Oh yeah, there it is. So you all came to a conference called JSConf, and this is the second talk, and I will not be talking about JavaScript at all. So sorry for that, but thanks for having me anyway. I will instead be talking about history of art, web design, and CSS development. Yeah, best programming language of all of them. And I want to talk about art first, and I want to introduce you to two artists that I like very much. The first one is Jackson Pollock. He lived from 1912 to 1956. And he always liked to stage himself as if he was an actor, because apparently it was hard in the 40s and 50s to be an artist and still keep your masculinity. So he was always photographed like this, so with a cigarette in his mouth, and he was drinking a lot of alcohol, and in the end he died while driving his car into a tree while drunk, so that's very actor-like. But let's not talk about his life, let's talk about his art. His art looks like this. This one is called Autumn Rhythm number 30. I have to read this. And it's quite huge. It's more than 5 meters and 2.5 meters in the height. So, yeah, nearly like this. And the way he was painting was not in the traditional way, but he was having the canvas on the floor, and then he was walking around and throwing some paint on it. Sometimes uses brushes, but also sticks, or pouring the paint directly onto the canvas from the can. Oh, by the way, the time is not running, so maybe could someone start this, so I will keep on talking forever. And he was always, there are interviews, and he was saying that he was picking up vibes from the landscape and translating this into a piece of art. So taking something that is invisible, feelings and so on. And there's also interviews where he's saying that he's painting, and then all of a sudden he says, "No, I lost the connection to the painting." So there's a lot of emotion going on, and he needs a connection to this. Here's another one, and this one's called Blue Poles. What's interesting about this one is it's the first painting that was sold for more than $2 million. Not the first painting ever, but the first modern art painting. And it was sold to the Australian National Gallery. And the people in Australia, they were really angry about this, because all of their money that they paid in taxes was used to buy this. But it's worth much more nowadays. So yeah, that's this. So, and here finally you can see him painting. So you see the canvas on the floor and him going around and splashing the paint on this. And I want you to remember and keep in mind that there's a lot of emotion that he needs to connect to and that he wants to fix on the canvas. So that's the first artist here. Second one, we travel back in time a little bit, is Filippo Bonoleski. He lived from 1377 to 1446, and he is mostly known for building the dome in Florence. If you've ever been to Florence, he is the architect, and he's very proud of this. You can see this, he's holding a picture up there. But what I really like about Brunelleschi is that he is the one who invented the central linear perspective. So he's the one who taught us that if you want to translate some three-dimensional object onto a two-dimensional surface, it mustn't look like this, but it should look much more like this, or maybe like this, depending on your taste of 90s video games. So, and because this was new and it was, nobody did that before, he had to convince other people that this is the way of doing this. So, because everything that is new, people first don't trust this. So he made an experiment to convince people that his technique is right. And he did this by painting a little panel of the baptistry that is also in Florence. And he was able to, you can see it's an octagonal building, and he was able to mathematically calculate the scale of all the objects around there, and paint this on a little panel. So he had this. And then to tell people, okay, this is the correct way of painting a central perspective thing, he positioned himself in the front of the dome down there, and he made you look onto the baptistry that's in front of the dome. And then, okay, this gets a little bit difficult. You had to hold up this panel in front of you, but looking away from you. So you looked at the back side, and there's a little peephole, and you look through it onto the baptistry. And then he held up a mirror so that you could see this. It looks like this. So here you can see that as soon as you have the mirror up, you see the painting, and if you take this away, you see the real thing. And this is how he convinced people that this is the right way of painting. And to make it even more complex, you can see up there, the sky was also reflecting, so it was not painted. So you could see the real moving clouds on top of the constructed painting. Yes, that's me drinking. Sadly, this panel is lost. We just know about this from writing, but there's something else. Here we have Brunelleschi, and he had a buddy called Masaccio, and just goes by Masaccio, like, you know, Madonna chair. Brunelleschi himself, he wasn't that much of a painter, he was an architect, but Masaccio was. And Brunelleschi told him about his findings on painting and doing the perspective stuff. And with this knowledge, Masaccio was able to paint the Trinità. This is the Godfather holding his son Jesus, and the white thing up there, that's a little dove, that's the Holy Spirit, sorry. And you can see here that all the lines are going down to this little point down there. And this is the first known painting that uses the central linear perspective. And the point is down there because when you go to the church where you can see this, it's painted onto a wall in the Santa Maria Novella, also in Florence. You can see that your eye level is down there. So this is, you're standing in front of this, and this is where you're looking, and then you look up into the constructed ceiling here. Everything is really constructed here, and so please don't ask me why this happened. I have no idea. So, yeah. So now you get to know the two artists, Jackson and Filippo, and let's have them look at each other. He does a lot of emotion, and you can see Brunelleschi, he's a mathematic lover, so he does all this, he's an architect. And I could have used other artists here as well. This one here is Claude Monet, Edvard Munch, also very famous for translating expressions on nature and so into a piece of art. But I could also have used Banksy. He does graffiti stuff, and for Banksy it is a lot of society, politics, but also something that is invisible, and he puts this into a piece of art. On the other hand, for mathematics, of course, there's Leonardo Da Vinci. I guess a lot of you have heard of him. M.C. Escher is another example, but there's also artists that are still alive, like Koos Verhoef. He takes computer-generated fractals and makes sculptures out of this. So this is all the mathematical stuff, and here we have a lot of emotion. Now, I want to make a little experiment, and I want to try to imagine what would it look like if these two were not artists back in their time, but were living today and were web designers. So, two web designers. What would their work look like? And let's start with Jackson over here. And I think he would always start like doing a mood board and collecting all the stuff that is needed. And then he would start maybe search for a key visual. and try to find the perfect visual to transport the message that he wants to show to the users. And of course, the key visual is not perfect, so he has to adjust it and has to adjust some lighting and the contrast and make everything just to have the right mood. On the other hand, Brunelleschi will probably give you a design system with buttons and give you headings and typography, all of these margins and so on, and of course an accessible color palette. And what they're working on is maybe, let's see, Jackson here will be working on a landing page like this, like for this cappuccino, whatever stuff, or cupcakes, I think it is. And on the other hand, Brunelleschi will probably work on some dashboard application. So two very different types of designers. And now again, these two designers get the same simple task. They get the task of give me a design with a headline and 2 paragraphs, and one of these paragraphs, there's a link in that. And let's start with Brunelleschi. He says, okay, I can do this, a headline, 2 paragraphs, and a link. Looks like this. That's good. And now there's a developer coming in. Here she is. We will call her Getty for no special reason. And here, maybe Brunelleschi used Figma, and she has a look at the headline and uses the inspect tool, and it looks like this. So she sees, okay, the text has a name, it's text for XL. You see the font weight and your font style, and the color also has a name, it's black. So he uses some design tokens here maybe. And what she does to translate this into HTML and CSS, she can basically copy all of this and use some CSS classes over here. So for the headline, for the H2, she says, okay, text for XL, this is from a system. You may have already guessed this is Tailwind classes here, so it's a lot of utility classes that she uses, and Brunelleschi seems to know this as well. So in order to translate this into a website, mostly she can use the inspect tool, copy stuff that is shown there, and copy this into the code, and doesn't have to write CSS at all, and it looks like this. And well, she goes over there and says, that's perfect. Let's work together all the time. Now, let's see what he does. He gets the same task. Give me a headline, 2 paragraphs, and a little link in there. And he says, okay, if I just do this and nothing more, and I'm not allowed to use images or whatever, let's make it like this. And yes, here she comes again. Looks at this and says, okay, there's no name for the headline, and okay, the font weight is okay, but the font size is 158.91 pixels. Line height is 160.5 pixels, and the color, I'm not sure. Is that pure black or maybe not? So she looks at this and I said, okay, we need to talk. Because you know what? This looks awesome. And I want to do this. And I now want to show you the process of what Getty here, our developer, does to translate this layout here into a proper website. Now, look at this again. And let's see what makes this layout special, what makes it stand out. And there's 3 things. First thing is the headline. The headline is so huge, it's not about readability here. It's like it's a substitute for an image, because he couldn't use an image. He just had these huge letters that are screaming at you. Second thing is the paragraphs. Here it is about readability. So the length of the lines here is nice. The line height is nice, so it's perfectly readable. And the last thing is the layout itself. You may already have seen that it's not completely centered. It's a little bit to the right. And of course, the paragraphs are on the right side of the headline, not on the left side. So this is what makes this layout special. And let's address these things one by one. Yeah, thanks for that. First, the headline. You know, it was these complex things here, but let's just round this up to the size is 160 pixels and the line height is also 160 pixels. But instead of using pixels, we can, of course, use another unit. And because this always needs to be very huge, and we want to have very huge letters, we can use viewport units. So this looks like this. We have the font size of 1em plus 10 VW. That's for the viewport width. And the calculation here is for accessibility reasons, so we make sure that the font size will never be smaller than 1em. So that's just here. And this is all we need to have this headline be always quite huge, depending on the width of the screen. Next thing, let's have a look at the paragraph here. The important thing, if you cannot read this, is 720 pixels for the width of the paragraph. And again, yeah, 720 pixels. Pixels are, in my opinion, not the perfect unit to use when working with CSS and on screen. So instead of using 720 pixels as a max width, I can put in a bunch of zeros down here. And why zeros? Because there's a not that known CSS property called ch. And one ch is the width of the character 0 in the given font size and font family and font weight. So if for some reason the browser does not load this font, the font family, and you get another font, it will still be nearly the same size and then same line length over here. So we can use max width of 50 ch, 50 characters, so you will have roughly 50 characters as a max width for this paragraph. Also very useful when you're doing a blog or whatever you have with a lot of writing and you want to define a nice reading length for your, line length for your typography. Last thing is the layout itself. You can see there are 4 columns. And 3 of them, on the right, you have 114 pixels, 344, and 230. Yeah, okay, this is pixels again. Let's try to see something that is not pixels over here. And we can say that if you multiply these 114 by 2, you get roughly 230. And multiplying it by 3, you get roughly 344. So it's 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3. And what's also important here is that most of these columns are mostly occupied by just white space. And distributing white space, that is something that can perfectly done by using Css Grid. And Css Grid is just perfect for that. And I will show you how this looks. You have a wrapper class around this. Let's say it's called fancy text. And you give it this display grid. And then you use grid template columns 2fr, 3fr, auto, 1fr. The 2 is for the 2fr over here, the 3fr there, 2 parts, 3 parts, auto for the text, and 1 part. And the fr unit works like this. You can always remember, like, whenever there's space to distribute, put 2 parts over here, 3 parts over here, and 1 part over here. So when there's 6 pixels, 2 go here, 3 go there, and 1 goes there. But only if there is space to distribute. And then we have to place our text onto the grid. So for the headline, we start with grid column 2, 4. 2 is because the first line would be over here. And it ends at the 4th line. And the paragraph also starts at the 3rd and ends over there at the 4th. And putting all of this together, you get this piece of CSS. It's 21 lines. There's a little bit more going on. You have the grid stuff up there in line 1 to 5. There's a little bit of margin in there. Then you have the headline. It gets, of course, the line height and the font weight and the grid column. And for the paragraph, You can see I also added a little bit of viewport width to the font size here in line 16, but it's not that much that we used for the headline. And the important stuff here, of course, is the max width of 50 characters. And this may not be the easiest piece of CSS that you have seen in your life, but this is something that gives you a totally responsive design that works without media queries and will always respect the designer's intention. And this is how it looks. So you can see that if you resize the browser, everything resizes really nicely, and as soon as there's enough space, you can see that the text gets indented. And here's another example where you can see how the white space is distributed. So it's always a little bit to the right. You have the two columns over here, the one part over there. And this will be 50 characters, and the 3 parts will be calculated over here. And I think this is kind of really just magic. And what is important here that the designer's, artist's intention is still there. So you see what makes this layout special. And in mostly all screen sizes, you can see this design. And all of this is only possible if you remember that at this point here, she said, this is awesome and we can do this. Instead, she could have said, well, you know what, you don't understand the medium. You don't know how this works. But don't worry, here's a Figma template with Tailwind components, and you know what? The developer experience is much better if you just stick to these and use all of this. And by developer experience, it's of course heard or read my experience. And if a designer hears this, then, well, maybe they get first angry and then sad. And we don't want this to happen. So before coming to an end, I now want to talk a little bit about all the characters that we've seen today. And I want to add another developer over here. She goes by the name Getty as well. And while our first Getty is does a lot of CSS and maybe a little bit presentational JavaScript, the other one is more into, let's say, frameworks, Vue, React, you name it. And you all know that there is this discussion, this discourse going around, and I will name this The Great Divide after the article by Chris Coyer. If you haven't read it, do. And you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, and is the front-end developer now a full-stack developer? Do we need full-stack developers? Do we need to divide this even more? Do we have a front of the front end and the back of the front end? And if you search for this on Twitter, you find lots and lots of opinions about this. On the other hand, there's also a lot of discussion going on the design level. You could argue, is there something like a full-stack designer? Is that a thing? But there's another question that's even older than the other one, and that is the question of, should designers learn how to code? And all of this, I think a lot of these discussions are a little bit unhealthy. We need to do this, but it's still a thing of people talking about each other and designers talking about developers and so on. And I'd love to have this a little more coming closer together. And the people that are doing design tools are doing a great job of doing this. So nowadays you have in Figma the auto layout that works like Flexbox. So things are coming closer together. And what I really hope is that things don't look like this, but instead look like this, so that there's an overlap and all of these people can communicate with each other. And I really love to work in a team that looks like this. And if you also want to have a team like this, be careful how you write your job descriptions and don't be too explicit, because it could be that someone is maybe over here, and if you put up some barriers, people could say that, okay, I'm not, my skills are not sufficient enough, because there's some back-end technology in there that I don't know, but still there may be value over here. Or let's say you have a designer that is here, and they maybe know a little bit of code, maybe know a bit of JS, but are afraid of using the terminal or are not confident using GitHub. But still, there's a lot of value here. And even more, if you look at people that are just between design and development, that are not a designer, not yet a developer, but they can help bridge between your designers and your developers and can translate because they speak both languages. And I think only if we all talk to each other, communicate with each other, we can build something great. Like if you remember, Masaccio was only able to paint the Trinità after Brunelleschi told him how to do this. And I just hope that we all can work together like this, communicate with each other, and build something that rises above the noise and doesn't look like all the same layout and website all over again. And that's it. Thank you very much.